Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of our StartPoint webinar. My name is Mosunlayode. I'm the Executive Director at the African Philanthropy Forum. If you joined us for the first session, you know that you're in for an amazing time with us. StartPoint Capacity Building Series, which we have put together for nonprofit organizations in Africa, is designed to build the capacity of proximate organizations so that you can be donor ready and donor attractive. And today we're looking and exploring strategies for building long-term partnerships with donors. And we have an amazing lineup of speakers, including Rosa from Sawiris Foundation. We have Peter from Elma Philanthropies. We have Shamira from African Collaboratives, and we have Anne from Bloodwater. And the session will be moderated by none other than our programs manager at APF, Yinka Shitu, who I will pass this on to, and I welcome you to have an amazing time with us today. Yinka, over to you.
All right, thank you again, and hello, welcome everyone for joining us. My name is Yinka Shitu, programs manager at APF. Now, the title of this session is Strategies for Building Long-Term Partnerships. To give you a little bit of a background, more and more across the African philanthropy landscape, we are seeing an increase in the number of NGOs collaborating with each other and funders collaborating with nonprofit organizations. And what we want to do is to help you as members of the StartPoint community to maximize these collaborations or form new collaborations of your own that serve you, not just in the immediate term, but in the long term. And to do that, what we have done is to carefully select some of our members and partners who are doing interesting work in this space to talk to you about how this can be done. So welcome with me. So joining us during the course of the discussion will be Rosa Abdel Malek, who is Partnerships Director at Sawiris Foundation, and Kungu, who is Director of African Partnerships at Bloodwater, Shamira Lukomwa, Senior Manager at African Collaborative, and Peter Oola, who is a Senior Program Manager at Elma Philanthropies. Right. Now, just as we get into this conversation, I will be starting. So yeah, feel free to let us know in the chat where you're joining us from, what organization you're representing. And to begin this conversation, I will start with probably the person who we realize who has done the most time in their organization. And that's none other than Rosa Abdel Malek, who has been at Sawiris for about 18 years. And I will just ask her to begin to set the context of this conversation by asking, from where from your work and where you sit, Rosa, what do you consider to be the key factors that contribute to building trust in donor partnerships?
Thank you, Yinka. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, APF StartPoint, for giving me the opportunity to talk now with all of you about partnerships, the closest topic to my heart. It is very important to always remember that donors and implementing NGOs both need each other. It is a win-win relationship. Donors simply cannot achieve their goals or KPIs without an NGO to carry out the work for them. However, donors have numerous NGOs to choose from, while NGOs are more limited in their choice of donor. Therefore, my personal recommendations is to build and earn the trust of the donors. NGO needs to have a reliable and reputable board member with strong professional track record. Second, the board of any NGO need to represent diverse and inclusive backgrounds. And it's not all Christian or all Muslim or one race. No, it needs to have everyone in the board of trustees. Maintaining strong relationship with government agencies, like in Egypt, we are working under the umbrella of the Ministry of Social Solidarity. Or if we're working with education projects, we are very closely working with the Ministry of Education. Sticking to core mission and not changing goals just for funding. And this is becoming quite often that I change my objective just to receive a fund. Holding firm on professional opinion rather than just pleasing a donor. And in this, I will put several NGOs need really to keep their professional how can I say, recommendations, their professional output, and not changing anything what I have seen on the ground. Submitting realistic proposal and budget based on accurate assessment and needs. And in this point also, I would like to mention that if you really want to have the trust of a donor, you need to have a project and then search for the funds and submit the proposal. But don't start with a proposal and then try to match it with a project, because at the end it will not work. Unless this is something similar, you're scaling up a project, you're doing something. So it is always better to start with the project. Thank you. Peter. So.
Thank you very much, Rosa. And that sets a very interesting framework for how we will be considering this. And now what Rosa has done is to tell us that one of the key strategies that goes into how you build trust for long-term partnerships is to first of all focus on the credibility of yourself or the organization that you represent. And she's mentioned the importance of strong board, strong leadership, and a strong mission and vision statement. Now, to sort of approach it from a slightly different angle, I'll be inviting Peter. Now, Peter, given the kind of work that you do, I'd also like to ask you, how do you believe that organizations just starting out can align and show credibility in order to build trust with donors?
Thank you so much, Yinka, and thank you so much to the APF team for the invite. My name is Peter Oola, and I've been at Elma for about almost 10 years. So it's really exciting, and I've learned a lot from the partners. So it's really nice to connect with all of you. So one of the things donors see is the aspect of looking at partners as allies. So often partners need to look at the donors they have as allies, because the donors invested in you, and so that means they already trust you. So the question that comes to your mind should be, how do I sustain this trust? How do I keep it going? And one of the ways should be around being able to ensure that you openly communicate and make this be something that you're intentional to do. So maybe set it out and have it on your calendar and say every quarter, I'll give an update to the donor on what's happening, so they're fully abreast on what's happening in your organization. And you shouldn't be scared to share, even when things are challenging. Often we want to only share the good things. So we need to be open to share, that we had planned for this, and this is not working out, maybe because of one reason or another. So that ability to share with the donor willingly allows them to brainstorm with you and figure out a way to course correct. I think that's something that's very helpful. The other is to look at the donor as a resource. So the donor also has staff that are qualified in the various spaces you're working in. So you can leverage on that to be able to grow, whether it's M&E, whether it's resource mobilization. So the resource you can leverage on. So that's the other thing I wanted to say. Thank you so much, Yinka.
Thank you very much. And I've never heard it said that way before, to view your partners as a resource that you can actually leverage to do your work and to learn from them. Thank you very much. Now, in view of what we've now mentioned, before we arrive at what trust is, before we build trust in the first place, then we have to identify those whom we're building partnership with. And so we would now go back to sort of the foundation in manner of speaking. And I will start with this one with Shamira. And so Shamira, drawing from your experience, from your work, how can organizations begin? First of all, how do you think organizations need to begin to approach donors? And what do they need to do to demonstrate genuine alignment, especially in view of the fact that we're thinking about long-term partnerships rather than just funding needs?
Yeah, thanks, Yinka. A lot of different ways to think about approaching donors, but I think one place I'll start from, and even just picking up where Peter left off, is there are, and I think even was mentioned earlier, there are lots of donors out there. And so figuring out who to approach can be tricky. But I think to Peter's point about leveraging your existing donors, that's actually a great place to start. Who are your current donors? They often know other donors that are in similar areas and fields as them. And so just asking your donors, hey, we are interested in growing our donor base. Who are some other donors in your network that you would recommend that we reach out to? And when they share, you can say, and would you be willing to make an introduction? that can actually really go a long way, because warm introductions are often, you often get a lot further than maybe just a cold reach out. We often have had the experience of, sending emails, feel like they're going to the ether, you're not sure who to reach out to directly. So your donors can definitely be a resource. But before even that, once you are trying to figure out who to kind of target and maybe who you want to ask your donors to introduce you to, it's really important to take a look at what are those donors currently funding. Oftentimes, funders will have websites where they kind of outline these are the different program areas that we're funding in, and really taking time to figure out of your current kind of scope of work, how would your work fit into, or does it even fit into? Sometimes by looking at the website, you realize that actually, I don't really see much alignment. And so it really goes a long way to kind of do that work up front, because by the time you're having that introductory conversation, you're already kind of, whether it's like using the language they've already started to use on their website, or understanding these are the specific areas where our work aligns. I also think another great resource is to look at other peers in your network, or even talk to peers. If you have peers that are doing similar work to you, ask them, what are the donors that you all are getting funding from? And maybe if you're not connected to those peers, you could also look at their website. Often organizations will post their donors on their website. So look at, 5 to 10 organizations that are doing similar work to you, look at their websites and see who are their donors, and then kind of go to people in your network who might be able to make those introductions. And kind of having that information up front really goes a long way in crafting kind of those initial conversations to make sure that you are aligned.
Thank you, Shamira. Just to, again, you mentioned Peter in your start, so I will go back to Peter for a quick second. And Peter, I mean, seeing as you do work in the programs strategic side of things, I was wondering, do you have anything to add with regard to, being effective about how you identify and approach donors and long-term partners?
And yes, I think Shamira has captured most of it. Maybe just to add and say, can you hear me? Sorry. So I think
you don't mind speaking up just a little?
The other is being able to really look at the donor websites. Usually they have annual reports that showcase some of the things they've supported. So it's a good place for you to start as well. But also looking at these spaces that are funded, does it align with what you're doing? Have they funded in a similar geography or even similar kind of work is the other thing. But thank you so much.
Yinka, if
Yes,
I could
please.
also. Yes.
That's it.
Great. I would say also, as you're looking at the website, also have a look through on who they are funding. So understand the kind of organizations that your prospective funder is interested in and really gives shout outs to. Really look through all of them and be like, what are these sort of standing points about all these organizations that can serve as a data point for you on what their criteria is. And lastly, also figure out who is the main decision maker for this funder. At the end of the day, come what may, it's people giving to people. And this doesn't mean look for who is the highest ranking officer in the institution. Oftentimes, if there's a lot of systems and structures, the executive director, CEOs or founders are not really on that table that makes decision on who makes it through to be a partner or not. So figure out who the main decision maker is and also plan your approach around that. I really loved what Shamira said about the warm introductions. That's even a great start point. Once you know who you're being introduced to, feel free to go to their LinkedIn, have a look at it. What are their interests? What do they write about outside of the work? And then figure out how to gently start a really warm relationship from the get-go.
Thank you very much. I was about to put you on the spot, but I'm glad you put yourself anyway. Thank you for contributing, Anne. And so while she was speaking, she mentioned the word StartPoint, and I will just pick it up from there. As you all know, this website is hosted by StartPoint, and what StartPoint seeks to do is to bridge the gap between funders who want to do work with credible organizations, in-approximate organizations. And one of the things that we prioritize doing is creating these kinds of linkages. So as much as it's possible, I would recommend that everyone who is on this conversation maximize those features on StartPoint. We'll be sharing more about those during the course of this conversation. And now I will do a slight detour. Now, Anne mentioned the need to be strategic and identify who you should be communicating with in terms of who the most powerful decision maker is. And so I would like to ask you now, coming back to you, Shamira, for a second, is there is the fact that I'm a small NGO just starting out, right? And I want to approach you, for instance, the African collaborators. How do you think organizations, especially those just starting out, can establish effective communication channels? What communication channels are even useful to begin with? And, how do people take it from there? Do you mind?
Sure. Thanks, Nika. And I'll also take a moment I'll share briefly about the African Collaborative because we're slightly different than perhaps other donors that are invite only. We actually do an open call. So a little bit about the African Collaborative. We are a collaborative fund that gives unrestricted multi-year funding to African founded and led social impact organizations. We're a bit different from your typical invite only funder in that we have an open call. We'll actually be launching one later this year. So we'll be sure that the StartPoint community will be aware of that when that launches in August. But in general, I think it's important it's a great question to understand because so many funders are invite only. And so I think when it comes to figuring out how to establish communication channels, I think it's really important to first and foremost understand who your audience is. And I think I'll attack this question in 3 ways. I'll talk about audience, medium, and frequency. So your audience, you really it's important to understand who your different donor audiences are. At the broadest level, you have current donors and prospective donors. And then within those categories, you have different donor types. So it's important to understand who your audience is and where they prefer to receive their information, because that's often quite different depending on who they are. So for example, if you're trying to target a program officer at a foundation, they're likely engaging with your work while they're at work. And so likely through email, some of them may be on LinkedIn, and they're often focused on really understanding kind of the outcome level impact of your work. On the flip side, an individual donor may also engage with your work through email, but maybe they also are using social media, for example, whereas maybe a program officer at a foundation might not really be looking at your work on social media. And so I think it's important to really understand where to first be contacting your donors, because I think that's like a critical piece of the pie. And then there is the medium. I think there's a pressure to feel like you have to be everywhere. So it's like, I have to be sending emails, I have to be sending reports, I have to be on social media, I have to be sending newsletters. And I think the reality is that if you are starting out, all of us are, there's constraints, and then who's in your team, how much time they have to really dedicate to communications. So you have to be strategic and focus on the mediums where your donors are most likely to engage. And I think a great place, if you're trying to figure out what is most effective, is to actually lean on some of your current donors again and ask, what of our communication has been most interesting or compelling to you? Oftentimes they might say maybe it's an impact report, or maybe it's an email that just kind of shares key information about what's happening on the ground in your work on the day-to-day. And then finally, I think it's like frequency, really layering your touch points strategically. I think at the end of the day, the purpose of communication is you want people to be able to understand your work, but you also want them to have your organization be top of mind. You don't only want to reach out when it's time for a renewal or at the time when you're trying to solicit donations. You want to have a regular cadence so that the person feels like, oh, I know what's happening at their organization because I received an email from the executive director, for example, giving a summary of what's been happening over the past month or so. And so I think really if you're able to figure out the audience, the different mediums that might be most effective, and then again, making sure that you set a cadence or a frequency that allows them to really feel connected. And sometimes that could be, maybe having a quarterly touch point or at least every other month to start and go from there.
Yes, thank you very much for that. I have a question for Rosa, but I worry that I have an even more difficult one for Anne. So Anne, this is just fair warning. I feel like I like you very much, that's why the hard stuff is coming to you. Right. So just before that, Rosa, you work with the Sawiris Foundation, which is one of the most notable foundations out of Egypt.
Yes.
And sitting in your desk as a donor or as a funder in your capacity, in what ways do you currently communicate with those in your database? Let's use your story as a basis to learn to say, how do donors typically communicate? And what has been your experience with how organizations receive that or respond to that?
Let me tell you, first of all, we usually we do, how can I say, مثلا 2 years ago, we decided to do an assessment for all NGOs that would like to work with the Sawiris Foundation. So we have announced it, and then we had Pricewaterhouse going down, doing the assessment for all NGOs. So NGOs start to know, if they didn't know about the foundation, they got to know about us, and same for us. So we are no longer limited to big NGOs or specific NGOs, because we also have call for proposal that we do. NGOs usually also send us newsletter frequently. Some of them send us like email if they have a new project that they would like us to know about, especially if it will go to a scale up. Some of them, and I appreciate this one, they usually ask for a meeting, one-to-one meeting, or with the person in charge of such project, with a presentation short, and that explain all the work of the NGO without sometimes asking funds. So this is for us, it is important. I think also we receive different emails or WhatsApp messages when it comes to Christmas or the holy months of Ramadan. So we invite NGOs to attend events, and they also invite us to attend events like dissemination of one of their projects. So you also have the time to communicate one-to-one or in a group. So you get to know them more, and they get to know you more. So it becomes like a rapport. And I think this becomes very successful when NGO is moving beyond the power of funding dynamics. It's a one-to-one. So it becomes more, we get to know more about them, and vice versa. And also they follow our, we do all announcements on Facebook, on Instagram, so they get to know also all our news, and we also follow the different NGOs just to know what's happening.
Thank you very much, Rosa. And I think just something I want to underscore for everyone who is listening, and it also links back to something Shamira had mentioned, and it's the fact that in your attempt to establish partnership, what you must first of all do is identify points of value, right? Mm-hmm. How would people prefer to receive communication of your value? Rather than attempting to establish communication or partnerships with donors purely on your benefit or on your own grounds, how about you find out what existing mechanisms they already have for communication and find ways to optimize those for yourself? I'm finding that to be a very useful one. Now, on the conversation about value, I would then ask Anne, as a preface to my question, is we've been speaking about partnerships, and we've been speaking more to the needs of what NGOs typically need, right? And so I'll just ask you, Anne, having worked with the implementing side and now the sort of philanthropy funding side of things, what do donors look for in partners, and not just partners, they are long-term partners?
Right. Thank you, Yinka. So probably a small introductions about myself. I'm Kungu, and I work with Bloodwater. So at Bloodwater, we exist to resource and strengthen community-led and community-driven organizations that are in the front line addressing health disparities across East and Southern Africa. And we do so by positioning our partners at the center, where we invest in the partners first, because we believe that if we have a healthy partner, then we'll have a healthy community. And so how do we ensure that the partners remain mutually beneficial? Now, the first thing is at the start point, please engage your point of contact at the funders as people first. They are not a transaction. We are not in a transaction. This is a partnership. We will be together for a while. And so if we can come to know each other as individuals and build that sort of cohesion, then there's a better chance of the sustainability beyond that. But one thing to point out also, don't come in too hot, don't be too personal. Give it time. Incrementally, you can earn the trust and the relational capital. And then slowly you become really honest partners that are working together through the journey. Second approach is, please centralize your relationship or partnership. Have a person who is a central point that leads the conversation, so that also you're able to ensure congruence and accuracy of information that is shared between you and your funder. Now, this oftentimes doesn't always have to be always the executive director. Remember, the main point we're working towards is relational capital. So who can bond the best with the donor, okay? Who is this? That becomes your point of person. That becomes the person that we are really trying to make as the forefront, the face, the relational engagement between us and our funder. Next thing is make sure you document everything. I know some of us are small organizations, we are starting off, but even just a Word document where we consistently maintain notes. The reason for this is every now and then someone will go away on leave. There'll be an email coming on. Nobody knows what to say to who for what. Have some form of documentation for everything. Next thing I would say is also learn to involve the donors in your work. I believe Peter mentioned aspects of it. So just evolve and grow together with your funder. Don't serve as this relationship is transactional, you produce and you show and then you move on. No. Walk together with your funder. Let them know this is an exciting thing that has started, even if it has nothing to do with what your formal engagement says on paper, because you want them to connect to you fast as an institution and as individuals and not just the work. So bring them along. We have exciting news. We have a new funder. We have a new project. We have a new site. Keep us updated. We want to feel like we're part of the journey. It creates also a sense of ownership. And really those emotional ties is what we want. We want to feel like, I'm really invested in this. I'm always cheering and championing for them. You will not want to let go. Because at the end, remember, you're working with people. It's not, Bloodwater is not a person. Anne is a person and all my other colleagues are persons. Connect with the individual. And also you really, if you can get to the point of when we are building these relationships, is abandon that mindset that it's only about numbers or about really sad gloom and doom stories, Put the fluff aside. Have a way to carefully and beautifully match how data and really strong qualitative stories build you as an institution. What are you learning? What are you evolving? It has to go beyond the numbers and it has to go beyond just sad stories. It has to be like facts. It's something that you're building a relationship with. Is yes, I'm struggling here, but I'm equally thriving on this end. And also be open to welcome support. Be open to reaching out. What Peter mentioned, really serve, basically view your funder as a resource as well. And then they just continuously build layers of investment into you. And that really does sustain the partnership long term. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I like how every episode of this series we've had, we always leave with, an iconic quote in a manner of speaking. And at the last discussion, something that came out was that fundraising is more about friend raising. And, you sort of touched on that also. I wonder what the quotes that we'll take away from this might be. I already have a couple of contenders. Now, I'll come back to you very quickly, Anne. But before I come to you, I was going to wonder, Shamira, when we speak now, she's spoken very quickly to what funders are looking for and how to navigate what funders are looking for. I know that African Collaboratives has a very interesting way of funding local organizations. And we've already begun to see questions like that in the chat box around the difficulties that just starting out organizations have, or some of the mistakes that they make in the course of trying to establish these kinds of partnerships. So off the top of your head, or from your research paper, if there is one, what are the most common mistakes that you find African-led organizations making when it comes to engaging with funders?
Interesting question. I mean, I guess when you're saying engaging with funders, I assume you mean like prospective donors, or do you mean current donors? I feel like I look at them kind of there's different kind of pitfalls perhaps. So curious if you want me to elaborate on prospective donors or.
Let's start with prospective and then we can go to current.
Yeah. So I think I don't know if it's necessarily like a common pitfall, but I think something to maybe think about is how, again, I think what I touched on earlier was maybe going in and not fully understanding what the organization or what the foundation is actually focused on. And I think there's often this pressure, and I don't think this necessarily just only African organizations. I think in general, there's this pressure of feeling like, okay, I have these like 5 to 10 minutes. Maybe you're meeting someone at a conference and there's this pressure to just feel like I need to share everything that I have to share and make this pitch about my organization in this small, short amount of time. But actually, I think what's really valuable, especially in initial meetings where maybe you don't know too much about a donor, is to actually spend time really understanding what are you interested in? What do you do personally, but then also like what do you do at work as well? Because I think there is often this feeling like you have to pitch yourself, but you actually will learn a lot more. And people love to talk about themselves. That's the reality. And so if you really just go in with questions of like, tell me a bit more about your work. What is something that's keeping you up at night? What are you really excited about? You actually come away from that conversation, even if it was just 10 to 15 minutes, really having a better understanding of what really they care about. And then you can go back now that you've made that initial contact to then frame your work and be able to share about it in a way that kind of speaks to them as well. So I think that's one that's coming top of mind for me. But I see that Rana, I think, also has her hand up, so I'll pass it to her.
Yes, I'll take Rosa and then I'll come back to Peter. Yes, Rosa.
Yes, I just have one thing. It's not about African organization, but it's about everyone. NGOs also need to give some space and time for donors to come back to them. Once they connect, it becomes nonstop. But also the donors or any agency has also other things to attend to. Board management, other proposals, other partnership. So there must be somehow like some space. So if I don't answer by email, I find the WhatsApp. If I don't find the WhatsApp, I find on LinkedIn. So it becomes at the end, even if the NGO is good, you're tired already before even meeting. So some space is needed. Thank you.
I hear you. And I know that Rosa speaks for every funder when she says some space is needed. And to quote Anne Kungu, don't come in too hot. Okay, so I'll take Peter very quickly.
Thank you. Just building off, I think, what Shamira said, and also I think Anne shared this earlier, is the aspect of, I think, for the initial engagement, focus on the relationship. I think that's really, really critical. And as you're doing this, I think, look back as an organization. Most times you find that potential organizations are sharing ideas which they haven't tried out, they have no experience in. And so it's often good to come in, show your inside, I would say in this case. What have you done as an organization? What makes you attractive to the donors? Talk about some of the things you've done in your community, the impact of your interventions, but also what you've learned through your interventions. But most importantly, I think let the funder leave knowing that, you know, this is a relationship someone wants to build and wants to learn about our work as well and what we've supported. I think that's a good place to start. The other thing I think that you would also look at is the aspect of most times we want to try as much as possible to align. It's not a must that you need to align with what the funder is looking for. It's also okay not to align, but at least have a thought partner that you can share and say, you know, this is our space, this is what we are doing. Whereas it's different, once in a while, you can also come and learn from us and see if it's something of interest to you. So I think it's really important for you to also ensure that you don't always try as much as to align and then lose your objective as an organization. And I think this was also mentioned by Anne as well as I think Rosa earlier, that often try as much as possible to ensure that whatever you're looking out for, if you, as Shamira said, you've researched and found about the donor, do they actually align in terms of the objectives of what you're doing? So that's really critical to guide that initial engagement. Thank you.
I hear you. Thank you very much. We've been having all kinds of questions pouring in the chat box. Some of them we've answered before, but then again, people joining at different points. So when we get in the Q&A section, we'll take this very quickly. But now I want to hear from Anne. And Anne, and sort of Shamira is the one who sort of inspired my phrasing of this question. And it's to say that now, after organizations have done all these things that you've said to do, they didn't come in too hot. They've begun a partnership to solve with these organizations. And they've gotten funding commitments for 2 years. And now the second year is coming to an end and there's been radio silence and you're trying not to pressure and it seems like funding priorities are shifting. Now, to make it shorter, How do you think, or what do you think organizations, both as let's start from the nonprofit organizations, right, or the receivers typically, what can they do to ensure that these partnerships that they establish are mutually beneficial over time?
Now, one thing that we have to do is basically having a lot of congruence across how we are communicating. So I always advise is start with the end in mind. If their relationship or the engagement is for 2 years, start planning for an extension or an invite day one. So what we're doing is when you get into the relationships, don't relax. We will continue to put in the work. So we are learning and we're evolving with our partner through the 2 years. You're keeping up with the updates of the institution because no organization wakes up and shifts their strategy. That would have to be very chaotic. Now, okay, putting aside the experience we had with USAID, put that aside. Everyone else, we don't wake up and just shift strategy. These are conversations in which we've been having over time. You'll see nuances of it around maybe conversations you're having with your funder, with our socials, with the website. So keep up to date with that. And the essence is now, as you're moving through the 2 years, how are you ensuring that every single touch point, every conversation, every report still validates the alignment with your funder? So even if the strategy starts shifting, you're not waking up today and trying to figure out, okay, how do I provide new detail that ensures or confirms to the funder that we are still aligned, even if it's a new section? Let's say they started off with you with education and now they're transitioning into aspects of health. Yet all along you had health happening, but you just don't overshare that because you're like, okay, I'll focus on the agreement and the engagement you have and nothing else. So always start with the end in mind. Build the relationship, walk along with them, share all the information. If you see shifts, ask questions. Why are you doing this? What is the thought behind this? How can we support? How we would love to be in any conversations to learn more. This is not a push for you to change who you are because autonomy is important. You have to retain your identity and purpose with or without your partner. So that is the approach that I would advise. And also at the end of the day, we also need to be okay with ending partnerships if that is a natural conclusion it will come to, so that you do not end up introducing things that in essence put you in a position to probably do harm to your community because it is not an area that you are focused in. So it's okay to be okay with ending partnership. And also, as I said earlier on, keep on fundraising. There is no end. And as you're fundraising, probably with your partner, if the relationship is thriving, how do you ensure more areas of sustainability? Maybe after the first year, this is the time to start introducing a new conversation. We would like to start a social enterprise. How can you support us in that journey? So you're securing yourself one way or the other, either with that existing funder, or if it ends, they leave you off at a better place than they found you. Yeah.
Thank you very much, and that was a little bit of a hard pill to swallow. Shamira, you were going to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add definitely plus one everything that Anne shared. And I think the thing that I wanted to add was that, in partnership, and I think something that I've always found helpful defining philanthropy as an exchange of time, talent, and treasure. So often we're focused on the treasure, which are the grants, but there's also non-monetary treasure as well. But I think there's this thing of time and talent. And so to Anne's point, even if a funding relationship might end, your goal and hope is that you're able, of course, if it's like still a good relationship, maybe there has been a strategy shift, maybe you all no longer qualify because your budget has grown above the foundation's budget size. There's still an opportunity for those donors to be involved in your work and to open even more doors for you. Whether, again, that's through donor introductions, maybe it's as being a thought partner. If you have a board that's international, maybe one of these donors wants to join your board, and there might just be even more opportunity beyond the grants that they've given you for them to pour into your work. And so I think it's really important to maintain those ties and think about these partnerships as, yes, there's the funding aspect, but there's that time and talent, and it's both a two-way street. To Anne's point, asking donors questions, what are challenges that they're facing? What are questions that are coming up for them? like as organizations, you all are the experts in the work that you do, and you're able to offer valuable insight that these donors might not have because they're not connected to the work. They're not seeing the work on the day-to-day. And so really looking at ways that you can also add value as well, which you already are through your work, but also sharing the insights that you have, I think really goes a long way.
Thank you very much for that. And now we will take a bit of a breather to listen to those who have been listening to us. Now, I know everyone has been sharing questions in the chat box. We really appreciate those. We're going to take those now. Just to let you know that because of the number of people on the call, we'll be unable to ask you to, ask your questions via audio because that can cause an audio interruption of sorts. So if you do have any questions, please remember to put them in the chat box. I will very quickly, we have questions here. I would ask the question, and then anyone on the panel, feel free to raise your hand or I will call you. We'll just take those very quickly and then we'll go into the final round of questions. Is that okay for everyone? Perfect. So we have a question here from Yusuf Abubakar who says, how do donors determine credibility of an organization? And I think that speaks to Rosa's first point. So Rosa, do you want to take that very quickly?
Yes, I think, hello. I think credibility is based on all what we mentioned at the beginning, is how their board is reputable. And for us, for the Sawiris Foundation, we always ask about the board members, more details. And sometimes we go down to the different governorate and really check about the board members. What is the relation between the NGO and the different?
I'm all right. Madam is not coming
Sincere
today.
apologies. All right, go right ahead, Rosa.
What is the relation with the government? The different government agencies are in accordance. Is there any problem that has been raised or found by the different the ministry? So this is for us is very important. I think also it is very important for us, or I think it will be for everyone, is that NGO hold their professional opinion and not changing it for the donor. I see for us, this is extremely important because if you can change, because we had a discussion, you also might change other things that I don't know about. And of course, we also check financial status. And here, when we say financial status, it is the approved one by an audit firm. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosa. The next question I will direct to Shamira. And Shamira, this question says, how do we engage with donors who don't take open calls? Yes, how do you, I'll leave you to that.
Sure. So I think with donors who don't take open calls, it's really about trying to get in front of them. And that's like the hard and quite frustrating part of fundraising, because it often requires you to have some type of connection. And so I think what's really helpful in trying to establish connections, I think it's leaning on your networks. If you attend conferences where donors are going to be, different types of philanthropy or industry conferences, looking at who's going to be attending, that donor might be attending. It might not be that donor, but maybe it's someone who is connected to that donor. And so maybe a goal would be for you to try to, set up a meeting with them, know who they are, figure out a way to connect with them in person at that conference. And then through that relationship, you're able to then ask, oh, by the way, like, would you be willing to make an introduction to this donor? I think really the name of the game for donors who don't take open or unsolicited applications is really trying to, as much as possible, figure out how you can get a warm introduction, which is someone else who knows them. And I think the channels for that are other donors, other peers who are funded by them, other people in your network, board members as well. Cold emails also can work sometimes. Sometimes people are receptive to that, but sometimes if you're not getting any response from those, a warm introduction is often the better way to go.
Yes, and just to add to what Shamira has said, for every organization that doesn't take open calls, I believe that there are others who do, right? And on this call, we have the likes of Floodwater, African Collaboratives, who typically do open calls and allow you to pitch. So I would say, find these kinds of organizations. And one of the easiest ways to find them and to be found by them is to be on StartPoint. So if you're not already registered to StartPoint, I would strongly encourage that you do. Just about every day, so let me be conservative and say every week, we are approached by donors across the world who want to fund organizations in Africa, and they want credible people, and we have a credible vetting system. So if that's something you struggle with, be on StartPoint. Okay, to the next question. Someone says, sometimes we engage with donors and they tell us that we don't meet their donor criteria. How do we move forward from this? I will pitch this one to Peter.
Do you mind repeating the question, please? Would you mind repeating the question, please?
Right. So someone is saying that sometimes they engage with donors and they are informed that they don't meet the donors criteria. How do they work through these kinds of issues and establish partnerships?
Thank you. I think just I'll start by building off what Shamira said. I think it's helpful for you to explore within the donor space to find out who are the other donors in the space. And then after that, be able to reach out. But often the first way to know about the donor criteria is really to reach out. And before you reach out, it's often hard if it's unsolicited. But if it's for solicited proposals, often this is out there and they give you a criteria in terms of what they look out for. But just for many of the donors, once you reach out, they share with you what they're looking out for. I know Rosa has already gone in detail in terms of what they look out for in terms of the due diligence. That's really for the health check of the organization to understand who you are and what you do, and also the experience in the space. But also, they're keen to hear from other donors. That's still part of the due diligence. What have they, I mean, those that have engaged with you, what are some of their learnings and experiences with you? Has it been awesome? What are some of the strengths that you have? And what are the areas of improvement that they could actually work with you on to grow in? So for that, in terms of the criteria, I think it's the easiest way is really to get out of the door and sort of reach out to the donor. I think that's the first step. And then that can be shared with you often.
Thank you very much. And now, Anne, this is a bit of a sensitive one, and I know that you have the skills to handle it. And someone here says, I'm a lady of low vision, and how well does your organization, or how well do you think organizations typically partner with those who work with disabilities or are led by people living with disabilities?
Pardon, could you repeat?
Yeah, so essentially this person is asking that how do donors work to prioritize disability inclusion, considering that these people specifically tend to have, how do I put it, more of a difficulty with accessing partnerships and donor funding?
Okay. I would say, so there's two sides to this. There is the consideration around what a donor's area of expertise is, area of focus is. And there's also the consideration around what inclusion looks like and what their mission is to us. Now, this all is determined also by how, as a funder, the setup is. Now, I'll give case in point as Bloodwater. We are an intermediary or a collaborative fund, whereby we fundraise and then fund African partners. Now, in such dimensions, if a funder fundraises, sometimes there might be restrictions that coming between them and the extent to which what level of work they can do. However, by and large, I am yet to come across any funder that has any restrictions or has any bars that basically excludes persons with disability. And the reason for that is because for every aspect of funding there is, more often than not, the spirit behind it is always how do we support more people who are being left behind, more organizations that are being left behind. So the challenge might be this. It likely is not that the fact that your work is focusing around people with disability. It is how we are positioning ourselves. Because for one, the reality is funding cannot be granted just on the basis of we work with persons with disabilities, we work with girls, fund us. That is not a cause, that is not a purpose. There has to be a shared goal. So if you're working around health, we are working around health. And these are the challenges we are addressing. But even more especially as an institution, we are working with persons with disability affected by health, and their challenges are more exacerbated because of these 3 points. That is a different approach. So it's not an issue more or less. I would want to believe that it's the funding isn't coming because you work with persons with disability. It is maybe look inward. How are we positioning our work? How are we basically fronting what our mission and our goal is and as an institution? And also, are we approaching the right funder? Because as we've talked before, yes, we would all love to fund, but we cannot fund everything and everyone. Some of us have very core areas that we believe we are strong in and want to focus in. That is our niche, that is our contribution to the sector, and that is where we work.
Thank you very much. Brilliant response. And someone here says, what is it with donors and not wanting to fund new organizations? How are organizations supposed to do their work if nobody will fund them in the first place? Who will bail the cat? This is an open call.
Can I answer this?
Yes, please.
I think it is important. Donor also needs to ensure that the fund are well managed in large NGO. However, my recommendation is that small NGOs can receive the funds from the NGO that will be contracted by the donor. So I will have one big NGO as an umbrella NGO, and the outreach can be done by smaller NGO. They will receive the funds, they will get the experience, and they will start having the track record. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosa.
I just wanted to maybe add that to definitely echo the frustration that, yes, it is frustrating that a lot of donors are primarily focused on organizations at a particular size or at a certain stage in their organizational development. But I think there's also opportunities to get seed funding. There are organizations or fellowships or opportunities that are actually geared towards newer ideas and organizations. So really spending time looking at things like, fellowships, kind of startup or seed funding stage opportunities. Those might be a good place to start. And again, this might be an opportunity where you can leverage, again, like your board, maybe to figure out ways to also bring in some additional fundraising. But yeah, I think focusing on the fellowships specifically at that stage can be helpful.
Yeah. Can I add also a point? Just as a follow-up of Shamira is, please identify the right funders. They are there. Okay, I will give an example for Bloodwater is we know very well that we are not the right fit for you when you're a startup. And the reason for that is our model is designed for when you are at that growth stage. You've gone through the startup phase, you've experimented, you finally found your focus area. At that point, now we are good to go. We are the right people to start looking for partnership with. So find the right partner who will work with you during that stage and who the team and the institution is built to provide the right kind of support for you at that stage.
Okay, thank you very much. And now we have come to just about the end of this discussion segment. Before you go, there's a couple of things that we have discussed and I'd like to bring back to your memory. We began this conversation by identifying what makes up trust. What do people look out for? What do they trust? And Rosa sort of gave us a description of what goes into that. Strong organizational structures. And without mentioning names now, we went into what kind of value you should be looking for, what kind of value you should be demonstrating, and what communication channels work to establish, effective partnerships. We also looked at some of the mistakes that we've all made or we've seen people make during the course of our work. And we don't have a lot of time, but I was wondering if we just want to go around just in 30 seconds, if you were going to give, now you've contributed a lot, you've said a lot. In 30 seconds, if you were to say something to an organization who is seeking funding or is seeking partnerships, beg pardon, or who is just starting out, what's the one thing you would tell them to always do or to never do? Okay, so in the order that we started this conversation, I will start with Rosa.
Always see that it's a win-win. Donor is not only the upper hand. It's a win-win. Thank you.
Thank you. And to you, Peter?
And for me, the big takeaway for me would be focusing on the inside out. So improve your systems, document your story, and then you'll be attractive. Thank you.
Thank you. Shamira?
Mine would be that you're more connected than you think you are. Leverage the existing relationships that you have. And if you're to ask, each person, 4 or 5 people I should talk to, you're going to see how big your web actually is.
Perfect. And Anne?
Mine would be trust your expertise, lead boldly, and know that you are representing a great community behind you. So own that role boldly.
Thank you. And with that, we've come to the end of this segment. It's a virtual round of applause for our awesome speakers. I would very quickly go to Lisa for any announcements and next steps before we hand over to Musu to close. Over to you, Lisa.
Wow, that was a very insightful session. I'm still overwhelmed by the wealth of knowledge from all our speakers. Thank you so much. So for next steps, we have a webinar coming up in July. So just stay with us, stay connected to us, check our social media, check our newsletter, because we send monthly newsletter and we also give updates. Join StartPoint if you are not already on StartPoint at startpointafrica.org. If you're already on StartPoint, we encourage you to complete your profiles, because when you complete your profiles, funders can see you, partners can see you. Some of the benefits of joining StartPoint are you get exclusive opportunities to grant opportunities within and outside of our community, and you also have increased visibility in our directory. That means funders can see you, and I know that that's what you're here for. So after the webinar, we're going to share some information with you, and we'll also share with you a survey. Do get back to us, because your feedback matters a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa. And now, Musu Layode.
Thank you, Yinka. Thank you for steering the conversation aptly. And I want to say a big thank you to Rosa, to Anne, to Peter, and to Shamira for sharing those critical points and insights. It's extremely useful. And even for those who are further along in their journey and are already familiar with the funding space, it's always a reminder to be grounded in these principles or in these strategies. So thank you very much for centering the conversation and moving us along. I just want to re-echo a few things that were mentioned, especially towards the end. There is a donor out there for every type of organization. You don't have to be big, you may not be too small. The important point is to identify the donor that is out there for you. So you are matching your interest with the donor's interest. If we're going in the opposite direction of the donor we're reaching out to, then we're likely to be unsuccessful. So find the one that works for you. And as Rosa said, it's win-win. The donor needs the NGOs and the NGOs need the donor. So we are all working together in alignment to drive development on the African continent. And the better we are at that, the more successful we'll be and efficient in moving the development needle on the African continent. And so we're really grateful to you for spending this hour with us, and we look forward to having you in future webinars, and we would be in touch with additional information. I see there is already more in the chat section, and Lisa has already mentioned that more information will be shared following this session. So thank you everyone for joining. Have a lovely rest of the week. We look forward to welcoming you in future.